It wasn't a private jet. There were no blacked-out SUVs waiting on the tarmac, no diplomatic security detail, and certainly no red carpet. On January 26, 2026, the man sitting in Seat 2A of British Airways Flight 268 was just another passenger. He looked tired, unshaven, and noticeably alone. To the other travelers glancing nervously in his direction, he looked like a ghost of someone they used to know. But to the Department of Homeland Security, he was simply case number D-015, a foreign national flagged for immediate removal. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, was not returning to London for a family reunion. He was being deported. For years, the world had watched the slow-motion car crash of the Sussex separation from the royal family, but no one predicted it would end like this. Not with a bang, but with a whimpering retreat across the Atlantic. The narrative we had been fed of a couple united against the world building a billion-dollar empire in California had completely disintegrated in the span of 72 hours. But the most shocking part wasn't the deportation itself. It was who was left behind, because as the plane's wheels lifted off the runway at LAX, Meghan Markle was nowhere to be seen. This is the story of the final 48 hours of the American dream. It involves a foreclosed mansion, a secret government operation codenamed Iron Gate, and a phone call to King Charles that went unanswered. How did a prince of the blood go from the halls of Buckingham Palace to being processed like a security risk at Heathrow? The answer lies in a single white envelope taped to a gate in Montecito and a betrayal so calculated it left the Duke speechless. But to understand the end, we have to go back to the mistake that started it all. The irony is razor sharp and absolutely devastating. The very instrument Prince Harry used to liberate himself, his 2023 memoir Spare, ultimately became the weapon the U.S. government used to destroy his new life. When the book was published, it was marketed as a raw, unfiltered look into the trauma of a wounded royal. Harry wrote candidly about his past, detailing his experiences with substances to cope with his grief. He wrote about snorting specific powders as a teenager, smoking in the gardens of Kensington Palace, and his experiments with psychedelics in California. At the time, he thought he was controlling the narrative. He thought he was being authentic. But in Washington, D.C. immigration officials weren't reading a memoir. They were reading a confession. Under U.S. immigration law specifically, the Immigration and Nationality Act, any foreign national who admits to violating controlled substance laws can be deemed inadmissible or deportable. It doesn't matter if you are a prince or a pauper. The law is absolute. For years, Harry had been living in the U.S. on an O-1 visa, a rare status reserved for individuals with extraordinary ability. It's the genius visa. But it comes with strict conditions. You must maintain high ethical standards, you must have an active sponsor, and you must not have a record of substance abuse. By late 2025, the Department of Homeland Security had quietly launched an investigation. They argued that Harry had either lied on his original visa application, a federal crime, or he had admitted to disqualifying behavior in his book. He had backed himself into a corner. If he said the book was exaggerated, he was a liar. If he said the book was true, he was a criminal in the eyes of immigration law. The hammer dropped in early January 2026. The DHS issued a notice to appear. This wasn't a warning. It was an eviction notice. Harry's legal team panicked. They tried to pivot. They claimed the admissions in the book were dramatized for effect. They tried to pull political strings, reaching out to contacts in the Biden administration and even vague acquaintances in the Senate. But the political climate had shifted. Protecting a controversial British prince who had publicly admitted to drug use was no longer a savvy move. The calls went unreturned. The appeal to convert his status to a simple tourist visa was blocked instantly. The reason: financial instability and lack of ties to the UK. The US government was effectively saying they didn't believe he could support himself. And as it turned out, they were right. While the legal battle was raging in Washington, a much more personal disaster was unfolding in Montecito. We often assume that royalty implies infinite wealth, but the reality of the Sussex lifestyle was burning cash at a rate that even a king's ransom couldn't sustain. The security bills alone were estimated at over $3 million a year. The mortgage on the Riven Rock estate was massive, and by the end of 2025, the income streams that sustained this golden cage had dried up. Spotify had long since canceled their deal. Netflix, after a series of flops, had quietly shelved their remaining projects. The couple's agency WME had declined to renew their representation contract, citing strategic misalignment. In plain English, Harry and Meghan were no longer profitable. The breaking point came on January 8, 2026. A white envelope was taped to the security kiosk of their $14 million estate. It bore the logo of First Republic Bank, now a subsidiary of JP Morgan. It was a notice of foreclosure. According to leaked court filings, the couple had defaulted on 2 consecutive mortgage payments. They were underwater. But the debt didn't stop at the bank. Reports surfaced that they owed nearly $3.6 million to Tyler Perry for unpaid private security and transport services. The very man who had once offered them sanctuary was now allegedly asking to be paid. The walls were closing in from every side. Harry attempted to liquidate assets, but there was nothing liquid left. The advances for the books were spent. The speaking fees had dried up as his popularity plummeted. It was a humiliation that Harry had never experienced in his life being broke. In the royal family, money is an abstraction. It's just there provided by the duchy or the sovereign grant. In the real world, when you don't pay the mortgage, you lose the house. DHS gave him 10 days to leave the country voluntarily or face a forcible removal that would bar him from re-entering the U.S. for 10 years. He had no home, no visa, and no money. But he still believed he had one thing: his partnership. He believed that he and Meghan would face this together, perhaps move to Canada or a private island or anywhere else. He was wrong. The night of January 24, 2026 will likely go down in history as the death of the Sussex brand. Inside the master suite of the Montecito estate, amidst the chaos of packing boxes and panicked lawyers, the final fracture occurred. Sources close to the couple describe a scene that was less of a fight and more of a cold business transaction. Harry, frantic and exhausted, was packing his bags. He reportedly told Meghan, "We need to go tonight. They're not just revoking the visa, they're clearing the property. We have to leave together." He expected her to pack a bag. He expected her to grab the kids. He expected the salt and pepper shakers to move together, as she had always famously said. Instead, Meghan stood by the window watching the paparazzi helicopters circling like vultures above their home. She was calm, she was composed, and she wasn't packing. According to insiders, her response was delivered with surgical precision. "You have to leave," she told him. "I am staying. For the children, for the brand, for the future." It was a masterstroke of self-preservation. Meghan, as a U.S. citizen, could not be deported. Her children, Archie and Lilibet, were American citizens. If she left with Harry, she would be abandoning her base of power, her connections in Hollywood, and her legal leverage. She had recently incorporated a new business, American Riviera Orchard, as a sole proprietorship, meaning it was in her name only. She had separated her assets weeks before the deportation order landed. She was insulating herself from his downfall. Harry didn't understand. He tried to argue. He tried to transfer partial property rights to her to save the house, but it was too late. The assets were frozen. He realized in that cold, quiet bedroom that the "us against the world" narrative was a myth. It was now Meghan against the collateral damage, and Harry was the collateral. She cited the children's schooling and the stability they needed, painting herself as the protective mother. But the message was clear. You are toxic assets. I am the surviving entity. The alliance forged to take down the crown had been dissolved not by the palace, but by a quiet abandonment in California. Harry boarded the plane alone. The flight across the Atlantic was a long, dark tunnel of realization. But if he thought the worst was over, he was naive about the reception waiting for him in London. While he was in the air, a different kind of machinery was turning at Buckingham Palace. This wasn't the slow, reactive monarchy of the past. This was a new regime hardened by years of attacks. The plan was called Operation Iron Gate, and it was reportedly spearheaded by the one man Harry had attacked most viciously, his brother, Prince William. The directive was simple containment. The return of Prince Harry was not to be treated as a homecoming. It was to be treated as a national security risk. Prince William and Princess Anne had worked in tandem to ensure that there would be zero ambiguity. The Home Office was briefed. Border Force was updated. The instructions were to process the Duke of Sussex exactly as they would any other deportee with a history of admitted drug use and security instability. When BA-268 touched down at Heathrow on the rainy afternoon of January 27th, there was no black Jaguar waiting on the tarmac. There was no VIP extraction team. Harry had to wait until the seatbelt sign turned off. He had to retrieve his own carry-on luggage from the overhead bin. He walked off the jet bridge and into the terminal surrounded by tourists and business travelers who did double takes as they realized the bearded man in the gray hoodie was the king's son. He approached the immigration desk. In the past, his passport would have been flagged for diplomatic waving through. Today, it triggered a yellow alert. A junior officer looking terrified had to ask him to step aside into a holding room, a room usually reserved for people with visa discrepancies or criminal flags. It was a humiliating formality. He sat there for 40 minutes, staring at the fluorescent lights, filling out a standard customs declaration form. Name Henry Charles Albert David. Occupation. What could he even write? Outside, the press had been alerted. The Daily Mail had the headline ready, "Return of the Rogue." But the palace offered no transport. Harry was forced to walk out of the terminal arrivals hall into the flashing bulbs of hundreds of cameras and hail a black cab. The image of the prince standing in the rain, clutching a single suitcase waiting for a taxi like a tourist, was the visual end of his royal aura. But the true crushing blow was yet to come. As the black cab navigated the M4 highway towards London, Harry made the one move he had left. He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking. He didn't call his lawyers. He didn't call his friends, most of whom had stopped answering months ago. He called his father. It was just before 2:00 p.m., Greenwich Mean Time. Inside Clarence House, King Charles was sitting at his mahogany desk. The private line buzzed. The screen lit up with the photo of a smiling Harry, a photo taken years ago, before the wives, before the wars, before the books. Charles reportedly stared at the phone. For a father, the instinct is always to answer, to help, to save. But Charles was not just a father anymore. He was the king, and he was under the strict advisement of the Prince of Wales. Sources say Prince William was in the room. He didn't snatch the phone. He didn't have to. He simply looked at his father and delivered the line that would seal Harry's fate. "We do not negotiate with terrorists." It was a brutal metaphor, but to William it was accurate. Harry had held the family hostage for years with threats of leaks, interviews, and books. He had sold their secrets for cash. Now that the cash was gone and the secrets were sold, he wanted back in. He tried to burn the house down, William allegedly told the king. "You cannot give him a bed in the ashes." The phone rang, and rang, and rang, and then it went to voicemail. King Charles let the call die. It was the moment the door didn't just close. It locked. Operation Iron Gate was in full effect. Frogmore Cottage had already been cleared and the locks changed weeks prior. There was no room at the inn. Harry, sitting in the back of the taxi, listened to the voicemail prompt. He hung up. He realized then that Pa wasn't coming to save him. The safety net he had spent his entire life abusing was finally gone. He directed the driver not to a royal residence, but to a rented cottage in Oxfordshire, a property secured by a distant cousin, the only roof he could find over his head. The next morning, the British press woke up with a vengeance. For years, they had been careful navigating the legal threats from the Sussex camp. But now that Harry was a deportee with no royal protection and no money for high-end libel lawyers, the gloves were off. The headlines were savage. They didn't just cover his return, they dismantled his entire life story. Journalists dug up the past. The victim narrative Harry had crafted in Spare was flipped on its head. His admissions of drug use were no longer framed as a journey of healing, but as evidence of a spoiled, reckless man-child who believed he was above the law. Old photos resurfaced the Nazi armband incident from 2005, the rehab visit in 2002. They were recontextualized not as youthful indiscretions, but as early warning signs of a character flaw that had been indulged for too long. International papers joined in. Der Spiegel in Germany ran a piece titled "The Prince Who Wanted It All and Lost It All." TikTok was flooded with edits contrasting his arrogant interviews from 2024 with the footage of him standing alone at Heathrow. The public sympathy, which had already been waning, evaporated. The commentary was ruthless. He thought he was bigger than the institution. He found out the hard way that without the institution, he's just a guy with a mortgage he can't pay. Meanwhile, the silence from California was deafening. Meghan's team issued a single brief statement. The Duchess is focused on her children and her business ventures. There was no defense of her husband, no outrage at his treatment. It was a clean break. The media quickly picked up on the rebranding. Meghan was launching a new interview series, and the rumors were flying that it would be a solo journey narrative. She was shedding the dead weight. So, where does this leave the man who was once the most popular royal in the world? Prince Harry now sits in a rented cottage in the grey damp of the English countryside. He has no official role, no security clearance, and no passport that allows him to return to the United States. He is a man without a country. The US has barred him. The UK tolerates him, but only as a private citizen. The royal family has ghosted him. It is a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. He sacrificed his family, his friends, his military titles, and his reputation all for a new life in America. And in the end, America chewed him up and spit him out the moment he stopped being useful. The freedom he desperately wanted has turned into a prison of isolation. But perhaps the most haunting realization for Harry is not the loss of the money or the titles. It's the silence from the one person he did it all for. As he watches the rain fall on the Oxfordshire fields, checking his phone for a message that never comes, he has to confront the brutal truth. The fairy tale is over. The prince didn't save the damsel saved herself, and the prince was left locked outside the castle gates. This isn't just a celebrity scandal, it is a lesson in hubris. It is a reminder that you cannot burn bridges and expect them to be there when you need to retreat. Prince Harry wanted to be just Harry. Well, he finally got his wish. What do you think was the royal family right to implement Operation Iron Gate? Or should Charles have answered that phone call? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to know more about the specific financial mistakes that led to the Sussex bankruptcy, click this video right here.